The desert dawn painted the New Mexico sky in muted purples and grays, but Clara Hawthorne saw only dust. Every particle seemed to cling to her, to midnight's black coat, and most agonizingly, to the still figure slung across the saddle. 3 days. 3 agonizing days of riding, of tracking, of a mother's primal hunt for a truth the world desperately wanted to bury. Drybone Gulch, a raw wound of a town, shimmered in the distance, a collection of unpainted wood and false promises. A nervous cough, then a snicker, rippled through the few early risers on the boardwalk. A woman washing laundry in a barrel paused, her eyes wide. A grizzled cowboy spat tobacco. They saw a gaunt, dust-caked woman on a magnificent black mare, a bundle of ragged canvas tied to the saddle. Laughter, low and uncomfortable, began to bubble up. Some called out, "Lost your way, ma'am?" Or, "Looks like you brought home a real prize." Clara's gaze, fixed and unwavering, swept over them. Her face, etched with grief and grim resolve, was a mask of stone. The laughter died, strangled by the unbearable weight of her silence. Her right hand, calloused and steady, moved to the blood-stained revolver holstered at her hip. She dismounted, her boots thudding softly in the dust. The canvas bundle, now untied, slid gently to the ground. It was then, as the townsfolk saw the outline of a young boy's lifeless form, that the air sucked out of Drybone Gulch. A collective gasp, then a terrified hush. The sun, cresting the mountains, cast long, accusatory shadows. Clara stood over her son. Eli, her eyes, once soft, now burning with an unholy fire. Her voice, a low growl that carried the despair of 1,000 battles and a boundless love, tore through the silence of the blossoming day. "Where's my son's killer?" 3 months earlier, the silence north of Drybone Gulch had been a comfort, not a torment. Clara and Eli lived on the edge of the wilderness, a sprawling, unforgiving beauty. Their homestead, modest but fiercely defended, was a testament to survival. Clara, barely in her late 30s, carried the quiet strength of a woman who had seen too much. The Civil War had scarred her, turning a young nurse into someone who understood the fragility of life and the brutal cost of conflict. Her husband, lost to the war, remained a tender memory, buried deeper than any secret. But Eli was her tomorrow, a strapping boy with eyes that mirrored her own quiet intensity and a spirit as unyielding as the land they worked. Their bond wasn't just mother and son. It was a partnership of survival, built on shared chores, whispered dreams under star-dusted skies, and the unspoken promise of a life carved out from nothing. He'd bring her wildflowers he'd found, just like his father used to, and she'd teach him how to mend fences and recognize the shifting winds. Drybone Gulch, 30 miles south, was a different world. The new railroad tracks had snaked through the territory, breathing an artificial lift into the dusty town, promising prosperity. But where new money flowed, greed festered. Mayor Silas Finch, a man of slick words and colder eyes, saw opportunity in every stretch of open land. He wanted it all, especially the prime plots, and he pressured homesteaders to sell. When Eli got wind of a fabricated land claim filed under Clara's name for their very own acreage, his righteous indignation flared. He wouldn't let anyone steal their future. "I'm riding down there, Ma," he declared, his jaw set. "This is our land." Clara watched him ride off, a familiar pang of maternal worry in her chest, but also a deep pride in his courage. She didn't know it was the last time she'd see him alive. Clara's question, raw and guttural, hung heavy in the Drybone Gulch air. The answer came not from the stunned townspeople, but from the jingle of spurs and the clank of a polished badge. Marshal Boone, a man whose face was as hard and unyielding as the badge pinned to his chest, pushed through the crowd. Behind him, Mayor Silas Finch, all slick-back hair and false concern, emerged from the saloon's shadows. Boone's eyes, cold and dismissive, swept over Ellie's shrouded form. "Tragedy, ma'am, a terrible shame." His voice held the practiced cadence of a man delivering bad news he didn't feel. "Your boy. Found out past the tracks. Ruled an accident. Happens out here." Clara's gaze, fixed and unwavering, bored into the marshal. "Accident?" Her voice, though quiet, cut through the tension like a razor. "My son was shot in the back. Dumped like refuse." She knelt, pulling back the canvas just enough to reveal the dark, grim stain on Ellie's homespun shirt. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. This was no hunting mishap. Mayor Finch stepped forward, his smile an unsettling mixture of patronage and menace. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we sympathize deeply, but Marshal Boone is a man of law. He's investigated thoroughly." Finch glanced dismissively at Ellie's body. "Perhaps the hardships of the frontier. A stray bullet. He rode here to protest an illegal claim on our homestead," Clara interjected, her eyes narrowing. "A claim you filed, Mayor Finch, under my name." Boone bristled, his hand instinctively going to his pistol. "Watch your tongue, woman. You're grieving, but that don't give you license to slander an upstanding citizen." Just then, a younger man, Deputy Reed Anders, stepped hesitantly from the marshal's side. His eyes, unlike Boone's, held a flicker of unease, a nascent discomfort. He looked from Clara's grief-stricken face to Ellie's still form, then to the unyielding faces of his superiors. Clara saw it, a flicker of humanity in the corrupt wasteland. She rose, her stance defiant, her eyes locked on Boone. Drybone Gulch wanted her gone, wanted this tragedy swept under its dusty rug. But Clara Hawthorne had brought her dead son to ensure the truth couldn't be buried so easily. The teachy sun climbed higher, baking the dusty streets, but the chill of Death's Sea lunged to the spot where Eli lay. Boone, regaining his composure, gestured for his deputies. "Clear this situation. This woman is causing a disturbance." Clara didn't move. Her eyes, still fixed on the marshal, promised a reckoning. "You call my son's murder an accident. You rule by fear and lies. You protect killers." Her voice was low, dangerous. Boone's hand twitched towards his sidearm. "That's enough, old woman. I'll have you locked up for obstructing justice." Before he could act, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Marshal, surely a grieving mother deserves a moment's peace." Delilah Crane, the saloon owner, emerged from the Golden Spur, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gaze, shrewd and unreadable, met Clara's for a fleeting second. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared scars. Delilah had seen her share of tragedy, presided over enough shattered dreams within her establishment's walls to know when a soul carried an unstoppable force. "Come inside, ma'am," Delilah offered, her voice firm. "Rest. Clean up. We'll tend to your boy." Her eyes flickered to Ellie's body, a rare softness crossing her face. Clara hesitated, then nodded. The town wanted her gone, but Delilah offered a foothold. As two of Boone's deputies grudgingly moved to carry Eli, Clara pulled a small, bloodied leather-bound journal from his saddlebag. Her fingers brushed the familiar leather, a surge of pain and fierce determination coursing through her. She clutched it to her chest as Delilah led her into the cool, dark sanctuary of the Golden Spur. Inside, Delilah poured a strong drink, setting it before Clara. Drybone Gulch ain't accustomed to folks stirring up trouble, especially not against the likes of Boone and Finch. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes held a challenge. "What do you truly want, Clara Hawthorne?" Clara looked into her own reflection in the amber liquid, then up at Delilah. "Justice, and the name of the man who put a bullet in my son's back." She knew this town was a viper's nest, but deep within its shadows, answers lay buried. And Clara, a woman who had patched up dying men on bloody fields, knew how to cut to the bone. The hunt had begun. Clara's days in Drybone Gulch settled into a tense rhythm of surveillance and subtle interrogation. The sight of her, a ghost in black, became a constant reminder for Marshal Boone and Mayor Finch that their peace had been shattered. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her, some curious, some fearful, most hostile. Whispers followed her like flies. That Hawthorne woman's still here. She ought to just leave. The journal in her possession, retrieved from Ellie's saddlebag, became her most guarded secret and her most potent weapon. Pages filled with his careful script detailed not only his daily life, but also his growing unease with the pressure from Finch's men regarding land sales. Critically, there were crude, yet recognizable, sketches of railroad survey lines and partial copies of a ledger with falsified land claims. Ellie's meticulous notes were a map leading straight to the heart of the town's corruption. Her first direct confrontation with Marshal Boone came swift and nearly deadly. She was questioning a distraught homesteader who claimed Boone's men had forcefully purchased his land. Boone, alerted by his informants, burst in, his face a mask of rage. "You think you can come into my town and stir up trouble, woman?" he snarled, unholstering his pistol. Clara, trained by years of battlefield triage to react under pressure, had her own revolver out in a flash, aiming it steadily at his chest. The standoff was brief, venomous, and ended with a tense retreat from Boone, but it underscored the danger she was in. Unsure who to trust, and with anonymous threats delivered by rough-looking men, Clara kept midnight close. One moonless night, as she studied Ellie's journal by a flickering lantern at the edge of town, a sudden rustle in the brush announced an ambush. Two shadowy figures lunged. Midnight, sensitive to her rider's alarm, whinnied and bucked violently, throwing one assailant back and giving Clara crucial seconds to draw her revolver. Shots rang out, scattering the attackers into the darkness. She knew then she was hunted, not just resisted. Her search for justice was now a fight for her life. This wasn't just about Eli anymore. It was about exposing the rot that had killed him. Clara's days blurred into a relentless pursuit. Ellie's journal became her most cherished possession and her meticulous ledger of the truth. Within its worn pages, alongside youthful doodles, lay the heart of Drybone Gulch's darkness. There were rough, hand-drawn maps of the surrounding territory, crisscrossed with lines Eli had marked as new rail expansion. Next to these, he'd meticulously copied entries from what appeared to be a falsified land deed ledger, names of homesteaders who'd supposedly sold their land for a pittance, or even unknowingly. Her own name, tragically, was scrawled next to their homestead, marked, awaiting final witness. Eli had been more than just a boy protesting a claim. He had been uncovering a vast criminal enterprise. He died not for what he possessed, but for what he discovered. The more she studied the faded drawings and cramped notes, the clearer the picture became. Mayor Finch wasn't just swindling isolated ranchers. He was orchestrating a grand scheme, clearing land along projected rail lines, likely anticipating a significant payoff from the railroad company for right-of-way. Eli, innocent and unyielding, had stumbled upon the entire conspiracy. One afternoon, Delilah found Clara hunched over the journal, a map spread across the saloon table. "What's got you so engrossed, dearie?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Clara pointed to a barely visible line on the map. "This is the projected rail line. It cuts right through my land." And Ellie's notes here, she tapped the ledger entries, show how Finch is acquiring land along this entire route. Eli wasn't just fighting for our home, he was exposing their entire operation. He saw the truth, Delilah, the truth they killed him to bury. Delilah's hardened expression softened, a flicker of old pain in her eyes. "Finch, he takes what he wants, always has." She paused, then leaned in. "There are rumors he keeps all his paperwork in a strongbox in his bedroom above the saloon. Unsigned deeds ledgers." A spark ignited in Clara's eyes. Ellie's journal provided the why. Now she needed the how, the irrefutable evidence. The town's whispers might have been of her madness, but Clara Hawthorne just heard justice calling, and she was about to answer. With Delilah's hushed instructions, Clara slipped out the back of the saloon just after midnight. The town was cloaked in a deceptive peace, but beneath the surface, the tension hummed. She scaled the exterior stairs quietly, her breath misting in the cool night air. The lock on Finch's private entrance was flimsy, yielding to a simple, practiced pick learned from her army days. The saloon's music, muffled and distant, provided cover as she eased inside. The mayor's room reeked of stale cigar smoke and cheap cologne. By the faint moonlight filtering through the window, Clara located a large, ornate chest at the foot of Finch's opulent bed. It was locked, but Ellie's journal had provided not just a motive, but crucial details. A hidden compartment, a double bottom. Clara recalled Ellie's notes about Finch's clever hiding places. Her fingers traced the worn wood, finding a subtle seam. A small click, and the false bottom sprang open. Inside, tied with rough twine, were stacks of land deeds. Her own, unsigned, lay on top, ready for fabrication. Beneath them, a rolled-up map, far more detailed than Ellie's sketches, confirmed her suspicions. It charted not just current railroad lines, but future expansions, the very ones Eli had pieced together in his journal. Eli hadn't just suspected, he had known. He had died for refusing to participate in a future that wasn't even real, a future built on stolen dreams. With the evidence clutched tight, Clara made her way back down. She found Deputy Reed Anders cleaning lanterns at the deserted jailhouse. His lamp cast a solitary glow, highlighting the lines of worry on his young face. He looked up, startled, as Clara stepped into the light, holding up the stack of deeds and Ellie's journal. "This," she stated, her voice quiet but firm, "is why Eli is dead. And this," she unfolded the map, "is what Finch and Boone don't want anyone to see." She laid out the cold, hard truths, the forged documents, the systematic theft. Reed, a flicker of idealism still burning within him, saw the irrefutable proof. His face hardened, the conflict in his eyes replaced by a quiet resolve. "What do you need me to do?" he finally asked. Clara smiled, a chilling, determined glint in her eyes. "First, we light a fire." Next morning, the town's land office burned, a beacon against the lawless sky. "This is what Eli died over?" Clara roared to the scattering onlookers, ashes raining down around her. Ashes. The gauntlet was thrown at each crackling flames of the land office cast a defiant glow against the pre-dawn sky. Clara stood amidst the flickering shadows, the heat searing her face, her eyes fixed on the collapsing timber. "This is what Eli died over?" She challenged the awakening town. Ashes. The message was unmistakable, a gauntlet thrown at the feet of Mayor Finch and Marshal Boone. There would be no more quiet whispers, no more buried truths. By midday, the entire town was abuzz. Mayor Finch, his face a mask of outrage barely concealing a tremor of fear, stood with Marshal Boone, barking orders to his remaining collection of thugs and a few hesitant citizens. The stench of smoke hung heavy, a constant reminder of Clara's audacity. Boone raged, threatening to ride out and string her up himself. But even he knew this was different. Clara Hawthorne wasn't just a grieving mother. She was a force of nature, and she was coming for them. The stage was set. The town square, usually a place of commerce and occasional revelry, became a tense arena. Finch, desperate to regain control, announced a town meeting, a public display of authority. The trap was sprung, but not for Clara. It was for them. As the townsfolk gathered, drawn by curiosity and a deep-seated unease, Clara appeared. Not storming in, but walking with deliberate calm, her revolver holstered, Ellie's journal held high in her left hand. Deputy Reed Anders, pale but resolute, took his place near the jailhouse, his eyes fixed on Clara. Delilah Crane stood at the doors of the Golden Spur, her expression unreadable, but a glint of fierce pride in her eyes. Mayor Finch's voice boomed, attempting to rally the frightened populace. This act of arson, this disregard for law and order, will not stand. We will find the culprit and punish them." Clara stepped into the circle, cutting him off. Her voice, clear and strong, resonated with the authority of unassailable truth. "The culprit, Mayor, is the very corruption you preach against." She held up Ellie's journal. "My son died for this, for exposing your lies, your fraudulent deeds, Your scheme to steal from honest folk. He died speaking truth." She moved, not aiming her gun, but drawing it in a fluid motion, her eyes locking onto Marshal Boone. And now, alive, shouting it. A tense silence fell over the square, punctuated only by the thud of Boone drawing his own weapon. The showdown had begun. The air crackled with anticipation as Clara stood in the center of Drybone Gulch, the smell of burnt wood still lingering. Mayor Finch, flushed with fury, gestured wildly at the smoldering remains of the land office. Marshal Boone, his hand resting on his pistol, flanked him, his eyes narrowed with lethal intent. Their hired thugs, a dozen rough men, fanned out, creating a loose cordon around the square. The townspeople, a nervous, silent crowd, pressed in, torn between fear and a burgeoning curiosity. "This madness ends now, woman," Finch bellowed, his voice curdling with manufactured righteousness. "You've burned down a public building, slandered honest men, and upset the peace of this town. I'll see you hang for this." Clara didn't flinch. She simply raised Ellie's journal higher. "The only madness here, Mayor Finch, is the web of lies you've spun. My son, Eli, discovered your corruption. He found your fake deeds, your plans for stolen land, your conspiracy to rob these good people of their homes." A ripple went through the crowd. Murmurs, whispers, some fearful, some incredulous. Finch's face contorted into a snarl. Silence. "She's a grieving woman, unhinged by tragedy." "Ungrieved, Mayor," Clara's voice cut through his bluster. "And unhinged by a justice you refuse to deliver." She took a step towards Boone. "You, Marshal. You covered for them. You called my son's murder an accident. You weaponized that badge and sold your soul for a share of Finch's ill-gotten gains." Boone's face purpled. "That's enough." His hand blurred, drawing his revolver. Clara was faster. She had never been a quick-draw artist like the legends, but she was a survivor. She moved, not linearly, but sideways, dodging his first shot, closing the distance. Boone, surprised by her unorthodox movement, fumbled a second shot. Clara brought her own pistol up, not for a headshot or a gut shot, but aimed precisely at his knee. The shot echoed, sharp and brutal. Boone screamed, collapsing into the dust, clutching his shattered leg. He thrashed, his revolver flying from his grasp. Before the mayor's thugs could react, Deputy Reed Anders, his face grim, stepped forward. "Silas Finch," he stated, his voice ringing with authority, "you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of Eli Hawthorne." He drew his own weapon, pointing it at a stunned Finch. The crowd, witnessing Boone's agonizing defeat and Reed's courageous stand, was stunned into silence. Clara, her gun still smoking, didn't flinch. Justice was being served, one bullet, one arrest at a time. The real reckoning had just begun. A shot that brought Marshal Boone to his knees echoed through Drybone Gulch, silencing Mayor Finch's tirade and freezing his armed thugs mid-movement. A collective gasp rose from the townspeople, their eyes flicking between the twitching, screaming Marshal, the defiant woman, and the young deputy who now stood, weapon drawn, against his former superior. The very air vibrated with the sudden shift of power. Finch, for all his bluster, visibly paled. His thugs, trained to obey Boone, hesitated, unsure of their next move without his barking orders. Reed Anders, seizing the moment, advanced on the paralyzed mayor. "Silas Finch," he announced, his voice ringing with a newfound authority, "you are under arrest for the orchestrated murder of Eli Hawthorne and for the systemic fraud against the citizens of this territory." Finch stammered, attempting to rally. "This is treason. I am the mayor." "You have no authority, deputy." "The authority of justice." "Mayor," Reed retorted, his gaze firm, "and the evidence will prove it." He gestured to Clara. "Mrs. Hawthorne has the ledgers, the forged deeds, and a map detailing your criminal enterprise. Eli Hawthorne died exposing your greed, and now his truth will bury your lies." Silence descended, broken only by Boone's pained whimpers. The townspeople, who for so long had lived under Finch's shadow, began to stir. A few brave souls stepped forward from the crowd, their own faces etched with recognition as Reed spoke of stolen land. The thugs, seeing their leader crumbling and their enforcer incapacitated, began to lower their weapons, some even slipping away into the background. Clara, her revolver still in hand, looked at the defeated Boone and the arrested Finch. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a bone-deep weariness. Justice, at last, stood revealed. She had honored her son's memory, exposing the corruption that had taken his life. The immediate threat was neutralized. The dark heart of Drybone Gulch's tyranny finally ripped open for all to see. The dust had settled, revealing not just the broken bodies of the guilty, but the potential for a new beginning. Dust settled in Drybone Gulch, but the echoes of the confrontation lingered. Mayor Silas Finch, stripped of his bravado, was led away in handcuffs by Deputy Reed Anders, gripping Ellie's journal and the incriminating deeds. Marshal Boone, bleeding and broken, was tended to by a terrified doctor, his reign of terror over. The hired thugs, without their masters, melted away like shadows at dawn. The townsfolk, finally awakened from their stupor of fear, began to murmur, then to speak freely, sharing stories of lost land and intimidation. Days turned into a week. A territorial judge arrived, and with the evidence meticulously presented by Reed and the testimonies of the now courageous citizens, the truth of Finch's corruption and Boone's complicity was undeniable. Land deeds were scrutinized, fraudulent claims overturned, and property slowly but surely began to be returned to its rightful owners. Reed Anders, no longer just a deputy, was officially sworn in as the new sheriff of Drybone Gulch. His face, once etched with uncertainty, now carried the quiet dignity of a man who had found his purpose in upholding true justice. Clara, however, did not stay to witness the rebuilding. Her vengeance had been delivered, her son's name cleared, the truth shouted from the rooftops. Her homestead, far to the north, was gone, likely ruined or reclaimed by the harsh land. There was nothing left for her there, or in Drybone Gulch. She had burned away the rot, but the ashes held few comforts. On a quiet morning, with the first light painting the eastern sky, Clara rode midnight out of Drybone Gulch. He didn't look back. Her journey was complete. Back in Drybone Gulch, Delilah Crane, with a rare, sentimental gesture, carefully framed Ellie's journal. She hung it behind the golden spurs bar, placing a small brass plaque beneath it that simply read, "The boy who stood tall." Years would pass, new tracks would be laid, and the town would slowly heal. But children in Drybone Gulch would grow up hearing the legend of the ghost-eyed woman on the black mare who rode in with the dead and left the truth burning in her wake. Narrator: in lands that buried sons with the seeds, she sowed justice like fire, and from fire rose a legend. Days turned into weeks, and the once feared empire of Mayor Silas Finch crumbled. The territorial judge, armed with Ellie's meticulous journal, the seized deeds from Finch's chest, and the testimonies of newly empowered citizens, systematically dismantled. The fraud land was returned, money reassigned, and a new, cleaner government began to take root in Drybone Gulch. Deputy Reed Anders, having stood firm against corruption, was formally sworn in as sheriff, his integrity a beacon in the newly illuminated town. Clara, however, didn't linger to witness the full bloom of her justice. Her mission was complete. The personal cost had been immense. Her homestead, once a symbol of quiet hope, now lay despoiled and abandoned. There was no going back to the life she had shared with Eli. So, with a silent nod to Reed and a shared, knowing glance with Delilah, she prepared to leave one quiet morning. As the first rays of sun kissed the dusty main street, Clara mounted midnight. Her saddlebags were lighter, but her spirit, though still bearing the scars of profound loss, carried a quiet sense of triumph. She rode north, towards the open, unforgiving land, leaving Drybone Gulch transformed in her wake. Back in town, Delilah Crane, with a reverence rarely seen from the sharp-witted saloon owner, took Ellie's journal. She fashioned a small, polished wooden plaque for it and hung it proudly behind her bar, a permanent fixture. A constant reminder, the plaque read, simply, the boy who stood tall. Years would pass if the railroad would build its lines, but now on justly acquired land Drybone Gulch would prosper, not on greed and lies, but on honest enterprise. And as children gathered on dusty porches in the long twilight, they would hear tales of the ghost-eyed woman who rode into their town carrying her dead son, a silent harbinger of change narrator. In lands that buried sons with the seeds, she sowed justice like fire, and from fire rose a legend, Clara Hawthorne, the woman who rode with the dead, left Drybone Gulch burning with truth, creating a legacy that whispered through the wind long after her silhouette faded into the setting sun.